Ascent Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents I'm Not Yelling, A Black Woman's Guide to Navigating the Workplace by Elizabeth Leiba, narrated by Zoleka Wundler. Introduction. When I was 12, I learned a painful lesson, that my voice had the power to kill. I had just read Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Reading about how she stopped talking for 5 years, until she was 13, terrified me. A pivotal moment in Maya's life happened when she was very young. She was sexually assaulted by her mother's boyfriend. After she spoke the name of her attacker, he was killed, the murder presumably committed by one of her uncles. Maya was devastated by what she interpreted to be the destructive power of her own voice. Because she feared what her words might be capable of, she stopped speaking and remained silent for 5 years. At 12, I also began to think long and hard about the potential of my own voice. From reading I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings and Maya Angelou's subsequent works, I knew a voice could be transformatively powerful. My hero, Maya Angelou, had gone on to be a trailblazer working for the city of San Francisco as its first Black bus conductor at the age of 16. Next, she was a star on stage, touring Europe in a production of Porgy and Bess. As a civil rights activist, she worked alongside Malcolm X for Black liberation in Ghana, Africa. She was the very definition of the power she had reclaimed by leaning into everything her voice could be. Comparatively, my voice didn't seem to stir up much interest at all. It appeared to annoy those around me, if anything. I was extremely interested in what my classmates thought about me. However, my voice tended not to evoke much emotion from them other than amusement, confusion, or resentment. A Black British child of Jamaican immigrants in South Florida was an anomaly my classmates tolerated, but were more inclined to ridicule. As a result, I learned to snap, crack jokes, and cuss. I became the class clown as a matter of survival, rather than for comedic aspirations. I was often the loudest voice in the back of the classroom, or at the back of the school bus. In the lunchroom, rather than shrinking from view, I made it my business to be the center of attention. I made sure I targeted my potential attackers before they had the chance to make fun of my English accent, my cheap clothes, and my natural braids that my mother adamantly refused to chemically relax. Nonetheless, once I got off the bus, I ran home to carefully complete my assignments and study for my upcoming quizzes and tests. My Caribbean immigrant parents were always quick to remind us how much they had sacrificed. It wasn't for us to bring home C's or for the teacher to call them while they were at work to complain that we'd been talking in class. All that studying landed me a full academic scholarship to the top journalism college in my state, where I learned that being loud and outspoken was detrimental to my academic success. Unlike in my middle and high schools, most of the students and faculty at the University of Florida were white. At my high school of 2,000 students, I graduated number 5 in my class. My loud, outspoken, boisterous persona had been valued and admired. I had been the editor of my school newspaper and an anchor on the morning news show. Our mostly Black teachers encouraged us to speak our minds and empower ourselves by challenging the system. They nurtured our outspokenness and were just as invested in our success as many of our own parents. At the University of Florida, in Gainesville, the philosophy was the total opposite. On the first day of orientation on campus, we were encouraged by the speaker on stage to look left and look right. We all promptly followed those directions, only to be given a stunning prediction about our future classmates in the large auditorium. He told us that neither of the students sitting on either side of us would make it to graduation. That statement hit me like a punch to the gut. Statistically speaking, we were expected to fail. Leaders at this elite university had already determined it was likely that we wouldn't make it to the graduation stage 4 years later. The speaker was matter-of-fact and quite nonchalant in delivering this news. There would be no hand-holding or encouragement from teachers invested in our success. like I had experienced in high school. By the time I graduated 5 years later, I'd only had one Black professor. The only professor I talked to for more than 5 minutes the whole time I attended the school. At the University of Florida, you had to put your nose to the grindstone, work twice as hard as your classmates, and prove that you belonged there. After all, if someone received a job because they were a minority, was it fair that the opportunity was given to them because of the color of their skin? The question was often posed by one of my journalism classmates during class discussions about the merits of these types of affirmative action initiatives. This was the early 90s, on the heels of the Rodney King verdict. Top journalism schools around the country were making a huge effort to increase Black representation in newsrooms nationally. This meant recruiting efforts at predominantly Black high schools like mine. Full scholarships, internships, and mentorships were offered to students from historically excluded backgrounds. On several occasions, I remember heated discussions about the fairness of affirmative action and white students in my classes feeling as though it was unfair. My response was always that affirmative action was attempting to address hundreds of years of policy and practice that had always been unfair. From my own experience as an intern, newsrooms still had very few folks that looked like me. My explanations were typically met with blank stares from my classmates, followed by awkward silences and quick pivots to another topic from professors who also looked nothing like me. I learned that loud, boisterous voice I had cultivated so well didn't contribute to my survival in spaces where people didn't look like me. Their curious glances betrayed that they were already wondering how I'd managed to be sitting next to them, questioning whether I truly belonged. Constantly making jokes, as I had in high school, was unseemly considering the gravity of being allowed in these spaces. I was the only one who looked like me. I had to represent in a way that showed I took this privilege seriously. There was no room for mistakes, because I felt all eyes on me every time I walked into a room. The most transformative moment of my life was feeling the heavy steel of handcuffs clamped on my wrists. I was placed in the back of a police car when I was just 19 years old, as a sophomore at the University of Florida. I was falsely accused of shoplifting and arrested. The charges were later dropped, and I won a civil lawsuit against the retail store that had called the police. But in that moment, everything I thought about the world and my place in it changed. For the first time in my life, I felt totally powerless, staring down at my hands and realizing I had no ability to control anything. For many Black women in corporate America, there is a similar feeling of helplessness and even hopelessness. Perhaps we have other trauma we have had to navigate and even suppress just so we can function in predominantly white spaces. We know we are expected to always be perfect, have the answers, and look like we have it all together. Meanwhile, we're slowly falling apart inside. We feel powerless because we know we can't share any of these feelings for fear of being seen as incompetent. We don't have the ability to empower our voices, so we turn inward, working harder than everyone else. We secretly hope that our work ethic will be rewarded, yet we are always overlooked and undervalued. Silence became my strategy as I completed my degree and entered the workplace. First in nonprofit organizations, then in media and sales roles, until eventually climbing the ranks of the administrative offices in higher education. I spent more and more time listening rather than speaking. I also learned to moderate my voice in a way that appeared to be appealing in those spaces. I wanted to be accepted, so I tried to present myself in a way that showed I wasn't a threat to the status quo in these environments. I always smiled. I rarely showed my outgoing personality. I was one note because one note was safe. That feeling of safety cultivated by my actions was violated again about a week after May 25th, 2020. Everything changed when I inadvertently watched the video of George Floyd being murdered by former police officer Derek Chauvin. I had managed to avoid the video on social media, quickly scrolling whenever I saw the coverage in my feed. But on this day, I was checking my work email on my laptop while I sat on the couch, I absently watched the top stories on the cable news channel playing on the flat-screen television on my living room wall. The sound was muted as the headlines flashed across the screen. Suddenly, without warning, the video of the murder began to flicker on my flat screen. I was totally transfixed. Before I knew it, I was crying uncontrollably, my face contorted in a pain that welled up from the depths of my soul. As I imagined his voice crying out for his mother, I clutched my face and doubled over at the waist. My own son was happily playing with his toys on the floor at my feet. It was at that moment that I knew I had to reclaim my voice. I needed it. It was not negotiable. It was an absolute necessity. I spent the next week in a mindless fog. I suffered from uncontrollable panic attacks, heart racing and hands shaking at various moments throughout the day. The smallest disruption, such as a broken glass as I loaded the dishwasher, sent me into a tailspin. One day, my children yelled, "Put your hands up!" while playing cops and robbers. It sent me into a frenzy. I knew I had to do something. I decided that I needed to live in my authentic self. This meant that in every aspect of my life, both at work and at home, I needed to walk in my truth. That meant I had to shed the pretense that had come to dominate my professional life. Up until that moment, I had been a perfectly curated version of myself. Code switching, coupled with an insatiable desire to be accepted, curtailing my opinions, and feigning an amiable personality to ensure my acceptance, had become my routine. It was a compliment to my perfectly coiffed and chemically processed hair, my conservative dress, my valley girl mannerisms, and my total being. Nevertheless, it had put down the mask and displayed the woman I really was. But who was I? I wasn't even sure I knew. And how would I introduce my real self to professional environments? The process started slowly, first on social media and then on my podcast. I began to express myself in ways I never had before about my angst regarding the direction of the country. I also expressed my own insecurities in professional environments and my observations of inequities witnessed and experienced over the duration of my career. I grew an engaged following of more than 100,000 people on social media over the course of a year. They supported the evolution and development of my voice. I realized my voice was valid, real, and true. So many Black women not only related to my experiences, but also shared their own. My mission has evolved into showing other Black women how to achieve this freedom. It comes from embracing this mantra of authenticity, which has brought me such a keen sense of emotional well-being and peace of mind. This book is a treasure trove of all the things I learned from researching the experiences of Black women in professional spaces and a roadmap to freedom. It's a clarion call to embrace our true authentic selves. It's also a community narrative of everything I experienced, as well as the stories I heard from the Black women who followed me. These women shared instances of not being hired for jobs they were more than qualified for. They talked about the microaggressions they endured when they were hired. They recounted tales of being passed over for positions and not being promoted despite their diligent work and credentials. These women second-guessed their very existences. I was relieved to realize I wasn't alone, but I was also desperate to find answers to their questions. Where did we get the idea that we couldn't show up at work as our real selves? Why did we feel we couldn't speak authentically, dress in ways that highlight our personal styles and express our personalities while keeping it classy, or even wear our hair naturally as it grew out of our heads? Who told us the selves we presented in every other environment were not professional or acceptable once we stepped into our workplaces? And why were we the only ones so uncomfortable in our own skins, while everyone else seemed so at ease? Why were so many of us experiencing imposter syndrome, and what did that even mean? I made it my mission to find out, to provide to my community the answers backed up by research, and to share strategies to overcome the challenges we're all experiencing. And I want to share those findings with you throughout the chapters of this book, so you can take advantage of the lessons I was able to learn over the course of the year that I spent engaging with the thousands of Black women on social media. I learned so many lessons in these interactions with the women in media, marketing, government, nonprofit, community advocacy, education, business, healthcare, diversity, equity and inclusion, technology, and small business about the ability to exude confidence, to command promotions or a higher salary, to articulate your value in corporate and business spaces, to take advantage of any and all opportunities that present themselves to you, and to leverage your voice to amplify your brand. This book will help you to understand that it's not your lack of work ethic that's holding you back, but the lack of experience in acknowledging the strength of your own personal story. You will also learn how to articulate that story to develop your own personal brand narrative that can be leveraged in corporate spaces or for business opportunities outside the workplace. Or perhaps you will decide to do a combination of both. You will learn the difference between imposter syndrome and the valid reaction to trauma from having microaggressions perpetuated on you because of your natural hair, mannerisms, dress code, and qualifications. By identifying strategies to address these toxic behaviors, you can confront them head-on. You can avoid behaviors contributing to your trauma, such as code switching and assimilation, and determine whether those places really deserve your presence. If those spaces are not conducive to honoring your true self, you'll be able to articulate your value and pursue opportunities elsewhere by leveraging the tools you learn about developing networks of like-minded Black women or others who serve as mentors and sponsors and constitute a support network. I am a 20-year veteran of higher education who has worked in nonprofit, media, and sales. I spent more than a decade as a college professor and a director in the corporate office of my institution before using my voice to leverage a platform of influence on LinkedIn. I grew a following of more than 100,000 people in less than a year, and, by doing so, I garnered national attention and was interviewed by the New York Times, Forbes, and Time magazine. I also had the opportunity to write for CNN and NBC, and was offered the opportunity to start a podcast on the Ebony Covering Black America podcast network. Most recently, I entered into partnerships and sponsorships with major brands like Dove to promote the passage of the Federal Crown Act and Forever 21 to promote their Black History Month clothing collection featuring Black designers. Every single one of these opportunities came because I harnessed the power of my real voice. That meant amplifying and articulating my worth and stepping into each possibility with confidence, knowing that I added value to all of them. Are you ready to learn how to find your voice? Keep listening. Chapter 1. How it began. You can't know where you're going unless you know where you came from. Maya Angelou. Who are you? No, really, who are you? Have you thought about who you are, how you feel, and how you act when you're at your most comfortable and feeling like your most authentic self? What does that look like to you? When I decided I wanted to live my truth in every way, I struggled through an identity crisis because I realized I honestly didn't know who I was. I had been code switching for so long, imitating what I thought was acceptable based on the norms I had encountered in predominantly white spaces. I didn't even know what my true voice and personality was like in its entirety, full and rich. It had always been moderate to some extent, even at home with my husband and kids. Most of my waking hours were spent at work with my organization leaders, coworkers, and clients, so I spent the least amount of time around friends and family. But I even found myself affecting my work persona at home, as necessary. My husband would be on the phone with a bill collector and ask me to have Angela talk to them. Angela is my middle name, and it's what my husband called the voice I use to code switch with bill collectors. I'd let them know they would receive our payment by the end of the week. I might even use it to talk to the manager at the store to complain about poor service. The voice sounded like an irritated valley girl, higher pitched than my own, naturally deeper voice. Angela's words were more hurried and clipped than my own. Mine is more of a low, slow southern drawl. But whenever I used Angela's voice, I would get my point across quickly. Of course, a payment extension was usually forthcoming as well. The manager had better quickly resolve any issue I had, because that voice indicated to everyone in earshot that I meant business. The version of Angela I used at work was a lot more easygoing. I was likable. I was safe. I didn't rock the boat. Angela agreed with most proposed initiatives, even if she didn't necessarily think they were sound ideas. She was the coworker who would play along to get along because she didn't want to be labeled as an angry Black woman. It was imperative not to speak up too loudly about her own opinions, gently offering suggestions and backing off quickly if they didn't appear to be well received. She listened intently and nodded congenially when appropriate. She didn't even object when supervisors or coworkers stole her ideas and presented them in meetings as their own. Hey, teamwork makes the dream work, right, Angela? High five. I made sure that my appearance assimilated to all the environments I worked in, first in nonprofit agencies, media and sales roles, then later in higher education. In each environment, I learned that blending into my surroundings was safest. So, Angela came out again. That translated to my perfectly pressed hair and muted makeup, my business professional, conservative, monotone dress code, and my mannerisms too. Morning routines were hours long, using gold-plated curling irons and multiple barrel sizes to press my relaxed hair as straight as possible and lay to the gods. Makeup needed to be glamorous enough to show I cared about my appearance, but not so glam that I stood out significantly from my peers. The goal was to be sure clothing was perceived as professional and blended in. Skirts and pantsuits were always black or navy blue. They were just a little more conservatively styled than my coworkers, just to be absolutely on the safe side. But where did I get the idea that I needed to be an alternative version of myself? I scoured my memory to try to figure it out. Where exactly did it come from? I was born in the UK to Jamaican parents. My parents had both immigrated to London and met as teenagers. They had been taught the value of diligent work by their own parents, who were immigrants as well. My mother was a nurse who had started nursing school at the age of 17, right out of secondary school. My father was a mechanic who had worked for London Transport on Britain's iconic red buses for as long as I could remember. They both believed in doing whatever you had to do to be successful, even if it meant moving halfway across the world. I was almost 12 when they had made the difficult decision to move the entire family to America, the land of opportunity. We landed in South Florida, where I was served complete culture shock with a side of fear and confusion. I had attended a primary school in the heart of London, where I was one of only 3 Black children in my class. We moved to a predominantly Black neighborhood in the heart of South Florida. The only white people at the school I attended were teachers, and even they were few and far between. I knew that a huge part of understanding the American Black experience in my adopted home was learning about Black culture and embracing this knowledge with every fiber of my being. My mother had always encouraged my love of reading. Some of my first books were by Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, Emma, and Sense and Sensibility. But once we moved to America, I realized I had little in common with Elizabeth Bennet and her sisters. I needed to broaden the scope of my reading list quick, fast, and in a hurry. I dove into reading the works of Richard Wright, Donald Goines, Alice Walker, Maya Angelou, Zora Neale Hurston, and Toni Morrison. Understanding Black folk was critical because that's what I saw in the mirror, reflected in my surroundings every day. I devoured book after book. There was no internet back then, so a bus ride to the library became a weekly pilgrimage. It culminated with an obsessive exploration of the card catalog, searching for hidden treasures. This knowledge was essential to my survival, as I absorbed the musings of Alex Haley, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, and Carter G. Woodson. They all told me secrets my parents didn't know. I'd watch them struggle to support my younger brothers and me. We all lived in one bedroom at my grandmother's house. She had immigrated to Florida a few years before us. My parents immediately returned to school to pick up where they left off in the occupations they had in London. They both worked full-time jobs while they attended school. Mom as a nursing assistant in a nursing home, Dad as a groundskeeper for the city of Fort Lauderdale during the day and a 7-Eleven cashier in the evenings. They showed me that failure was not an option and that there was no sacrifice too great to be able to succeed and aspire to professional and career goals. I wasn't aware of the statistics at the time, but I would be overcoming virtually insurmountable odds to even graduate and attend college. According to the Education Trust, while Black students attend schools that are underfunded, they also have less access to experienced teachers, a full range of math and science courses, school counselors, and gifted, talented, and advanced placement, and international baccalaureate programs. Black students get the illusion of education without the critical components of a quality education. This systemic approach to denying Black students a quality education has resulted in inequities in high school graduation, college enrollment, graduation rates, and degree attainment. My parents weren't aware of these grim statistics either. As far as they knew, America was the land of opportunity, regardless of where you attended school. My job was to report to school, work hard, and bring home the highest grades possible. After all, it was the least I could do, considering all the sacrifices my parents had made to bring me to the land of opportunity. Despite the merciless bullying I endured daily, I tried my best and forged ahead in 7th grade. I knew my parents would accept nothing less. My upbringing in South Florida primed me to be as bold, confident, and outspoken as I possibly could be. Being meek and quiet meant being picked on, so I became loud and unapologetic. Growing up in a predominantly Black neighborhood in the heart of Fort Lauderdale, I was less than 20 minutes from Miami. I saw that the most popular kids in my middle school were bold in every move they made. The girls on the school bus, in my classes, and in the lunchroom were audacious and loud. They wore fluorescent spandex, bright-colored makeup, multicolored braids, and bamboo earrings. Their bangles jingled loudly as they animatedly moved their arms when they spoke. Each point and syllable was emphasized with a clap of their hands, a kiss of the teeth, or a loud smack of the mouth. One that would be even louder if they were chewing gum. I was mesmerized by those girls and vowed to be just like them. The type of girl who said whatever was on her mind and didn't back down, no matter what. In high school, I became the editor of the school's newspaper and an anchor on our news station. Speaking up at every chance became a daily routine, and I never moderated or dialed down my voice or tone. My accent was now the adopted drawl of my South Florida peers, with loose speech punctuated by shoulder shrugs and exaggerated raised eyebrows and lips poked out as needed. My school was over 90% Black, with most of my classmates coming from what would be considered low-income households. Most of us qualified for free lunch because we were below the poverty line, even though we didn't use it because school lunch was nasty. Instead, we would break the school rules by leaving campus during lunch. We gathered enough change to buy pickled hot sausages or beef patties at the convenience store on the corner. Then, we stood outside the chain-link fence and savored their deliciousness until the bell rang. The chain-link fence offered scant separation from the dilapidated houses surrounding the school. Guys from the neighborhood with heavy gold rope chains around their necks and matching gold grills decorating their cocky smiles hung out on the corners outside. They flashed their wads of cash, designer clothes, and sneakers most of us thought we would never be able to afford. Some of them rode around in box Chevy cars with ragtops, sporting Gucci or Louis Vuitton logos woven into the vinyl. The candy paint jobs glistened in the hot South Florida sun, just like the chrome 24-inch rims. Despite the contradictions we witnessed around us, our teachers, who were mostly Black, encouraged us to focus on success, graduation, and life beyond the east side of Fort Lauderdale. They wore kente cloth, brown wooden beads, and Black medallions. They stressed that we were the descendants of African kings and queens. My junior year, my American government teacher, a Black man who was active in city government, recommended I read Cheikh Anta Diop's The African Origin of Civilization. It was in that moment that I embraced the idea that my identity was one of greatness and royalty in the embodiment of Blackness. Emmanuel Kulu, who I interviewed for the Black Power Moves podcast, is the author of I, Pharaoh. He explains why this type of knowledge is essential in the development of young Black minds. My parents brought me up, knowing my history, my father being from Cameroon, from the Zulu tribe, and my mother being from the heart of the civil rights movement right here in Chicago. My mother was affiliated with the Black Panther movement, so when they met, I had the Black American side, and then I had my African side. I was always enlightened on these great ancient African kingdoms, including Egypt. One day, when we had a project to describe a great person of antiquities, of ancient history, my father and I made this beautiful project by painting his face brown. It was about King Tut, and the teacher gave me a B-. I watched my father argue with my teacher because the teacher said it was historically inaccurate. The only reason why is because he was a Black man. So, since the 3rd grade, that lit a fire into me. The African historian continues, my father used to tell me the saying, what you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself. What you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself. What you know of yourself depends on what you've been told. So, it's time to change the narrative of what we've been told. So, it's going forward as we continue this ancient African antiquities research. Dr. Nadia Lopez explains why it is so significant for Black children to be taught by teachers who look like them and to be inspired by teachers invested in their success. She decided to give students more opportunities to study the sciences, technology, engineering, arts, and math. She is the award-winning educator who became a viral sensation after the popular blog, Humans of New York, featured her as one of the most influential people. Dr. Lopez founded Mott Hall Bridges Academy, a STEAM-focused middle school in Brownsville, Brooklyn, New York, in 2010, and served as the principal for 10 years. She was named among LinkedIn's 2019 Top 10 Voices in Education and received the Black Girls Rock Award alongside Michelle Obama in 2015. We teach our children the boring way so that, this way, they'll only go into entry-level positions, but they don't think about becoming producers, Dr. Lopez emphasizes. I wanted to remix what education looked like. I wanted to bring them opportunities to meet people who look like them, who are doing things. Let them learn about the astrophysicists. We could teach them about building rockets. But I'm not excited about the Mentos and the Coca-Cola and seeing it explode. I want them to actually meet astrophysicists and talk about their journey to getting into that position and then what opportunities come with that robust experience. She continues, you see that children who have great potential but don't have the resources, they have never left the immediate community, dealing with all types of abuses and temporary housing. There was just such a divide between children because they were being told that they weren't going to go anywhere, that they weren't going to get to college. And that broke my heart because they just needed someone to understand and listen to them. No one was taking that time because they were so focused on getting through the instruction. So, I created a space that allowed children to know that they were exceptional. Teachers, like Dr. Lopez, shaped my formative years in learning that I was exceptional. High school graduation came all too soon, and my arrival on the college campus in North Florida was a major culture shock. I realized that I was now a small fish in a humongous pond, and blending in without making anyone feel uncomfortable was most advantageous. Rather than wanting to be seen, I wanted to disappear, hoping to skate by, pass my classes, and not disappoint my parents. Unlike my high school teachers, the majority of whom had looked like me and encouraged us to be bold and confident, my college professors didn't even seem to see me. Their eyes didn't register recognition when they spoke to me, as if they were looking right through me. Most made it clear they didn't care about our academic success. If you didn't pass, they told us it was probably because we didn't belong there to begin with. They explained it was for the best, to weed out the weakest amongst us. At orientation, we were advised to look both left and right because neither of those individuals would be there at graduation. I took note and made sure that I looked and acted like I belonged because I wanted to be sure I remained the student in the middle. I wanted to be the one striding across the stage to grab my diploma while my parents clapped proudly in the audience. Because of the pressure, I became meek and unsure of myself. Rather than excelling, I was a middle-of-the-road student, holding on for dear life to maintain the GPA needed to maintain scholarship eligibility. It was a world of difference from high school, where I had graduated 5th in a class of 200. The University of Florida had a student body of more than 50,000. I felt lost and alone. Most of my classmates looked nothing like me. Neither did my professors. The safest bet was not to attract additional attention from their disengaged eyes. They'd already made it clear my success was not their concern, so I internalized that idea and acted accordingly. I couldn't afford to draw their ire. Failing classes was not an option for a student attending on scholarship. Unlike in South Florida, I found that my boisterous, exaggerated confidence and loud and vivacious ways were not an advantage on the campus in Gainesville, the country town in North Florida. The long-term success of my strategy to be quiet and assimilate so I could be accepted and successful in this strange environment was finally challenged on a Sunday during my sophomore year. My morning had begun quite typically. I'd slipped out of bed in my dorm, grabbed a hoodie, pulled some baggy shorts over my hips, and slung my JanSport book bag over my shoulder. I headed off campus, leaving my roommate sleeping soundly. I needed to drop some film off at Ecker's Pharmacy. As the historian for a volunteer organization on campus, it was my job to document our activities, which included feeding the homeless and playing bingo with elderly patients at the local nursing home. I hoped to drop the film off quickly so I could get back to campus and get some studying done. I was pretty sure I also needed to do some laundry before my week started. Therefore, it was minutes before I was headed right back out the double doors and through the black plastic theft detection mechanism on my way out of the store. It lit up red and beeped so loudly that I physically jumped and spun around to see if the cashier by the register at the door could help. "Did you buy anything?" he inquired.
We hope you enjoyed this preview. To continue listening to this audiobook on Google Play Books, use the link in the video description.